So we've talked before about authoritarian and democratic techniques. Lewis Mumford talked about how technologies don't arise in a vacuum, but they emerge from and then give rise to certain social structures. And he found they fell into sort of two categories, democratic and authoritarian techniques. And a democratic technique would emerge from and give rise to democratic power structures. An authoritarian technique would emerge from and give rise to authoritarian power structures. And a great example would be anything that involves mining, because nobody wants to get into a mine. And so you need an authoritarian power structure to enforce people getting into the mine. So if you have any technology that requires mining, it's going to require the entire social system that goes with it. And then once you have a technology, it affects how you perceive the world. So for example, if you have automobiles, that affects how you perceive the world. That makes it, you know, I live 3 miles from a grocery store. We could talk about grocery stores as a technique too. Anyway, I live 3 miles from a grocery store. So if I forget something at the grocery store, it's no big deal because I can just drive back and get it. But if I had to walk the 3 miles, that would change how I perceive going to the grocery store. So they're also authoritarian techniques, not only because they give rise to authoritarian power structures, but because they themselves become authoritarian and they can run the society. So that's one reason, for example, that cities are designed for cars more than they are for human beings. We've created this thing, and then suddenly we have to design the entire living space around that. Or that's also why, as this culture is killing the planet, and as global warming is just running amok, that's one reason the very, very few of us are the only ones who are talking about stopping industrial civilization, because industrial civilization is in charge. It is more important to these people than a living planet. And so that's how technologies can come to control us. And so why is that important to be able to name? And I'm going to step back from that for a second and talk about, I still remember when I was in my 20s, a friend of mine called me up and she was reading a book on post-traumatic stress disorder. And she started reading off some of the symptoms of PTSD. You know, I was abused as a child, and she was too. And there were, you know, insomnia, night terrors, a strong startle response. And as she was reading off this list of symptoms of PTSD, we were both just marveling. Someone is describing our experience. And I know similarly, I know someone who has been in the past couple of years diagnosed with bipolar. And when he was diagnosed, then a friend sent him some literature on it, and he was weeping with gratitude because someone was describing his experience, and they were able to put a label on it, and they were able to bring, here's another way to look at this, is that, you know, I have Crohn's disease, and it wasn't diagnosed for quite a while. I had severe diarrhea, I had bleeding, I had all these problems, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, terrible pain. I had all these symptoms. And then to find out that to get a story, this is Crohn's disease that leads to these symptoms, to get a story that made sense of all these disparate symptoms was incredibly helpful. It's like a doctor friend of mine says, that the first step toward proper treatment is correct diagnosis. And so that's one of the ways that naming authoritarian techniques has been really helpful for me. I didn't name them, Lewis Mumford did, but reading Mumford about that was one of the reasons it was really helpful, is because it helped me to make sense of a lot of disparate facts. I kept asking myself for decades, who's in charge? How is it that we human beings have created social systems in which most of the people are spending most of their waking hours doing things they don't want to do. In other words, working a job that you have to pay rent, to survive on the planet. And that's, how did we create a system? How did a system get created that is so in which not even the humans are primarily benefiting from the system. It's just where most of us are spending most of our time doing things we don't want to do. That just seems crazy to me. Or why would you create a system that systematically destroys the land? I didn't understand any of that until Mumford really helped with that, with putting a frame. I suddenly understood how these technologies can end up essentially driving society. So I think that this particular video is in some ways about techniques and why it's important to be able to name them and how that helps. And then also it's about the larger importance of, if you have a constellation of problems, to be able to, I don't know, if you've ever been in a really terrible relationship and you have this problem, that problem, some other problem, but something's just bugging you. You keep thinking about, it's like, why can't I see the whole picture? And then suddenly, like, one more thing will happen, and suddenly you get the other person's psychology, you get what they're trying to do. And a really trivial example of this is I was in the final stages of a relationship with someone, and she kept picking fights. I couldn't understand why she was picking fights all the time. I was, as well as being annoyed and upset and hurt, I was also baffled. It's like, why are you picking fight every single day? And then one day I went to teach. I was teaching in the evenings at that point, and I went to teach, and I forgot to feed my dogs before I left. And when I got home, the dogs had ripped up a bunch of cardboard boxes out in the barn where they hung out. And I immediately thought, if I was mad at me and I was not capable of saying in English, because the dogs can't speak English, if I was not capable of saying in English, I'm mad at you, Derrick, because you didn't feed us, what would I do? Maybe I would chew up some boxes and leave them all strewn about. And then it occurred to me, if I was in a relationship that I wanted to end and I was not able to end it for this reason or that, what might I do? I might pick fights every day in order to get the other person to end it. And that insight helped make sense of the otherwise nonsensical behavior. Suddenly all her behavior made sense. And Mumford's analysis of techniques helped make sense of so much nonsensical behavior. Why has there been a food production and distribution system created that leaves many people starving, and that makes many people dependent upon the system as opposed to their land base? Why would that happen? Why would there be a system where most people are working jobs they don't love? And on and on and on. Why would cities be designed for cars? All these examples I've already given. Why would the military get huge amounts of money when schools are left without funding? And the authoritarian techniques notion helped me comprehend all that.